"Your wife is still alive," Maya Johnson whispered, her voice carrying through the drizzle-soaked memorial garden, sharp enough to cut through the gray silence. Thomas Becket froze mid-step, the polished marble under his expensive Oxford shoes reflecting the overcast sky, droplets sliding down the edges of his tailored gray coat. Around him, the sound of water hitting stone mingled with the distant hum of traffic, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The assistants shivered, glancing at one another nervously, some attempting to stifle small chuckles, unsure if they should intervene or retreat. Maya stood firm, 10 years old, small but unyielding, her dark hoodie clinging to her frame, damp from the rain, hands gripping a frayed handkerchief with subtle golden embroidery that glinted faintly when the light caught it. Her eyes, wide but unwavering, locked onto Thomas, and in that gaze lay a certainty that made even the most confident adults hesitate. He shifted slightly, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a flicker in his cold blue eyes betraying the shock of hearing words he had never imagined anyone would dare say. Maya's fingers tightened around the handkerchief, the fabric rough against her skin, yet a strange calm emanated from her, as if she knew she was standing on the edge of truth, and no one could push her back. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet stone and freshly cut grass, rustling papers held by an assistant who froze mid-motion. Thomas exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to stretch through the tension-soaked air, the rain falling in a steady rhythm around them, tapping lightly against the memorial plaques, a soft percussion echoing through the courtyard. "I saw her," Maya continued, her voice deliberate, precise, unflinching, weaving a narrative built from the tiniest details only a child would notice. A faint scar crossing the wrist, short platinum hair that shimmered even in the gray light, a necklace with the initials EB, and movements she had observed, small gestures that adults might overlook, but that spoke volumes to anyone who paid attention. Thomas took a step closer, the gravel crunching softly under his shoes, eyes narrowing as he tried to reconcile disbelief with the fragments of truth she laid before him. Every instinct screamed caution, yet he could not look away. Maya's small form stood tall against the tempest, droplets running down her cheeks, not from fear but from the cold, her voice unwavering, each word a ripple that disrupted the calculated calm of the billionaire's world. Around them, the silence grew, punctuated only by the distant hum of city life and the persistent fall of rain. Yet within that quiet lay the brewing storm of revelation, the subtle tremor of a truth that had long been hidden, waiting for someone willing to speak it aloud. Thomas's mind raced, revisiting every memory, every assumption, every conclusion he had drawn over the past year. And in that storm of recollection, Maya's words cut clear and precise, unyielding as steel. The handkerchief in her hand shifted slightly, catching the dim light in a glimmer that Thomas could not ignore, a tangible anchor to the intangible certainty she radiated. Every muscle in his body tensed, a subtle internal battle waging as he weighed disbelief against the possibility that his world had been missing a piece of its puzzle. Maya's gaze did not falter, and in that steady, unshakable presence, Thomas felt the first stirrings of doubt, of awareness, of the slow dawning of understanding. The rain continued to fall, soaking the memorial stones, running down the elegant lines of the bronze plaques, but amidst the cascade, a singular truth crystallized, undeniable in its simplicity. She had seen something that could not be unseen, and he would have to listen, would have to act. The tension coiled, waiting to release, and in that charged silence, Maya Johnson's quiet authority filled the space, small yet immense, the moment stretching and holding every heartbeat in suspension, a prelude to the revelation that would challenge the certainty of even the most powerful man in the garden, leaving viewers hanging on the precipice of discovery, the answer just out of reach, compelling them to follow the story to its inevitable unfolding. Thomas Becket stood silently for several heartbeats, the rain soaking the shoulders of his tailored gray coat, droplets dripping down to the polished leather of his shoes. His gaze flicked back to the frayed handkerchief in Maya Johnson's small hands, the golden embroidery glinting faintly in the dim light of the overcast afternoon. The city beyond the memorial garden hummed quietly, muffled by the persistent drizzle, the sound of tires on wet asphalt blending with distant sirens. He felt a strange pull, a tension in the air that made even the assistants hover anxiously, unsure if they should step forward or remain hidden. Maya's dark eyes remained fixed on him, unwavering, the tiniest quiver in her fingers betraying the chill of the rain, but not the certainty of her words. Thomas exhaled slowly, a long, measured breath, his mind cycling through every memory, every missing clue, every moment he had believed lost, and now confronted by this undeniable presence. He shifted his weight, the gravel underfoot crunching faintly, and he realized that the calm he had meticulously maintained over the past months was fragile, threatened by the truth standing before him. Maya lifted the handkerchief slightly, letting him glimpse the intricate stitching, a subtle pattern that aligned perfectly with the story she had pieced together, a puzzle no one else could have solved. His eyes softened fractionally, a glint of curiosity breaking through the veneer of control and authority that had defined him for years. The assistants whispered among themselves, tension tightening their throats as they watched the unfolding exchange, the air charged with anticipation. Thomas's hand moved, almost imperceptibly, as he considered stepping closer, his boots pressing against the gravel as if drawn by an invisible thread toward the girl who held a key to something long hidden. Maya's gaze never wavered, each second stretching like a taut wire, the rain dripping off her hoodie in thin, steady streams, her breath visible in the cold air, marking time with a rhythm as deliberate as the ticking of a distant clock. He noticed the subtle details she had observed, the scarf faintly visible under her wet sleeve, the necklace gleaming faintly despite the muted light, the way she had recalled movements and gestures that could have been missed by anyone less attentive. A breeze swept across the garden, carrying the scent of wet stone and cut grass, rustling leaves against the monuments. Yet in this microcosm of sound and motion, Maya's presence anchored the scene, a fixed point of clarity amidst uncertainty. Thomas adjusted his stance, muscles tensing and relaxing as he considered the implications, the possibilities expanding and contracting like the tide, each breath heavy with the weight of newfound doubt and emerging understanding. Maya's small frame, soaked yet resolute, seemed to embody both patience and inevitability, the quiet insistence of truth that demanded recognition. He bent slightly, scrutinizing the handkerchief and the details she had noticed, the pattern of stitches, the faint wear, the faint scent carried from afar, all confirming her careful observation. Each moment felt elongated, the drizzle falling in near slow motion, droplets tracing paths over the marble plaques, the muted light reflecting subtly against Thomas's coat, the world narrowing to the space between the girl and himself. He noticed the precision in her voice, calm but unwavering, the way each word landed without hesitation, commanding attention despite her size, the authority of certainty emanating naturally from her presence. Thomas's thoughts spiraled, linking past oversights with present evidence, the realization settling in that this child, small and overlooked by many, possessed a clarity and insight that he himself had lacked, and that to ignore her would be to dismiss the very truth he had been seeking. Maya shifted slightly, her fingers tightening once more on the handkerchief, the sound almost imperceptible, yet Thomas registered it, feeling the gravity of this quiet insistence pressing against the walls of his controlled world. The assistants shifted, papers trembling in hands and folders held tight, aware that a subtle shift had occurred, a pivot in authority where perception and insight outweighed wealth and stature. Thomas stepped closer, boots crunching lightly on the wet gravel, eyes narrowing in focus, every detail absorbing him. The moisture in the air, the faint scent of rain on stone, the weight of the moment pressing against him like a tangible force, compelling him to act, to believe, to follow the trail Maya had illuminated. The garden seemed to contract around them, the soundscape narrowing to the rhythm of rain and the quiet inhale of those watching, anticipation threading through the air like static. In that suspended moment, Thomas understood that everything he had thought secure, everything he had assumed closed, was opening up under the scrutiny of a small, determined girl who had stepped into a space no one else dared, and that the unraveling of a mystery long concealed had begun, each heartbeat a step further into the discovery that lay ahead, a revelation that promised to challenge him, compel him, and change the path of events in ways still unseen, leaving the audience poised at the brink, eager for the next moment to unfold. The rain had slowed to a fine drizzle, the clouds hanging low over the memorial garden, turning the bronze plaques a muted gray. Thomas Becket took a hesitant step forward, the wet gravel shifting under his polished shoes, each step deliberate, measured, as if he were approaching a fragile truth he had long ignored. Maya Johnson, standing firm despite the chill, raised her gaze slightly, her dark eyes catching what little light penetrated the overcast sky. And in that glance, Thomas felt the weight of conviction, the sort that could not be dismissed or ignored. Around them, the city breathed softly through the rain, a muted chorus of distant engines, dripping gutters, and the occasional call of a bird seeking shelter, all blending into a subdued rhythm that seemed to underscore the tension between certainty and doubt. He reached for the handkerchief in her hand with careful fingers, noting the slight dampness from the rain, the texture of the fabric, the golden threads catching the faint light in subtle flashes, each detail a marker of authenticity that anchored Maya's story in reality. Her posture remained composed, small shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, and though her fingers gripped the handkerchief tightly, there was a calm in her stance that spoke of preparation, observation, and careful judgment. Thomas's heart beat steadily but heavily in his chest, each pulse echoing against the silence that had fallen over the assistants standing nearby, their own breath shallow, anticipation threading through the air, electric and taut. The assistant closest to Thomas shifted his weight, papers rustling softly in his hands, but Maya's gaze remained unbroken, a tether that kept the focus on her and the subtle evidence she presented, the visual markers of a story only she had witnessed. Thomas bent slightly to examine the embroidery on the handkerchief more closely, the initials glimmering faintly, confirming what he had already begun to suspect in fragments and half-formed thoughts. Every detail lined up precisely. The faint scar traced over her wrist, the necklace with the initials matching records he had seen long ago, the short platinum hair she had described, all coalescing into a narrative that challenged assumptions he had held with unwavering certainty for too long. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of wet stone and freshly cut grass, rustling the leaves of nearby trees and brushing across Thomas's coat, a reminder of the elements outside this small, charged space. Yet none of it could distract him from the careful attention that Maya commanded without effort. He considered the implications of what she had revealed, the depth of her observation, the awareness required to notice what adults with years of experience had missed, and a subtle, reluctant admiration began to stir within him, tempered by disbelief and the magnitude of what had been uncovered. Maya's small figure seemed to expand with presence, the way she held herself, the certainty in her words, the calm in her actions projecting an authority beyond her age and stature. Thomas's hand lingered over the handkerchief, the tactile reality of it grounding the abstract truth she had spoken aloud, each movement deliberate, careful not to damage the fragile connection between evidence and acknowledgment. The assistants, still observing at a cautious distance, exchanged furtive glances, recognizing that this encounter was shifting the balance of understanding in real time, that the child standing before Thomas possessed clarity and insight that transcended expectation. Thomas's gaze softened as he processed the layers of detail, the precision with which Maya had documented her observations, the thoughtfulness embedded in her careful recollection of sequences, gestures, and objects that could have gone unnoticed. The rain continued its gentle descent, water sliding down marble and stone, dripping into puddles that reflected the muted sky, while the world seemed to condense into the narrow space between Thomas and Maya, a theater of perception and revelation, tension building with each heartbeat, each measured inhale, each pause pregnant with possibility. Thomas adjusted his stance subtly, aware of the importance of measured action, of the recognition that this was more than a child's claim, more than a fleeting observation, but a meticulously corroborated account demanding attention, contemplation, and eventual action. Maya's eyes, steady and bright despite the chill, held him, anchored him to the reality she insisted upon, compelling him to reconcile months of unanswered questions, assumptions, and overlooked signs with the undeniable clarity she now presented. Every droplet of rain, Every muted sound of the city beyond, every subtle shift of wind and light served to heighten the awareness of the moment, concentrating focus on the revelation, yet leaving the resolution tantalizingly just out of reach, drawing attention forward, compelling engagement, anticipation, and reflection. Thomas's breath was steady, his mind aligning the evidence, connecting dots that had been invisible until this convergence of observation, intuition, and courage, and in that deliberate stillness, the narrative began to crystallize, revealing a path forward that demanded verification, careful steps, and the beginning of action, leaving the audience poised for the next discovery to unfold. The overcast sky began to lighten slightly, the drizzle thinning to a gentle mist that clung to the leaves and the marble surfaces of the memorial garden, each droplet reflecting faint glimmers of diffused sunlight breaking through the clouds. Thomas Becket stepped back, considering the gravity of the small figure before him, Maya Johnson, whose presence seemed to command the space despite her size, the careful precision in her stance and the steadiness of her dark eyes anchoring him in a way that demanded attention and reflection. Around them, the distant hum of the city created a soft backdrop, punctuated by the occasional drip from the wet branches, the muted sounds shaping a rhythm that seemed to echo the cadence of the tension between truth and disbelief. Maya adjusted her grip on the handkerchief, her fingers trembling slightly with cold but not with fear, and Thomas noticed the minute details she had catalogued. The stitching, the faint wear from use, the subtle scent of fabric that carried faint traces of places and moments he had long forgotten, all converging into a tangible link between memory and evidence. His blue eyes narrowed thoughtfully, the precise observation she had displayed resonating with a clarity that had been absent from his world of meetings, schedules, and carefully controlled interactions. Each breath he took was measured, deliberate, as he mentally retraced months of assumptions, events overlooked, and the silent gaps in the story of his missing wife. And in each step, the awareness that Maya had illuminated what others had ignored began to solidify into understanding. The assistants at a cautious distance exchanged glances, their collective tension building as they observed the interplay, the careful stillness between child and billionaire charged with implication and consequence, their presence simultaneously acknowledging and constrained by the subtle authority emanating from Maya. She lifted her gaze slightly, catching a faint shimmer of light on her hand, and in the reflection Thomas could see not only the physical evidence of the handkerchief, but also the unwavering certainty, the quiet insistence of truth that it represented, compelling him to reconsider everything he had dismissed as unlikely or impossible. The marble steps beneath his feet were slick with moisture, each careful adjustment of his stance drawing him incrementally closer, both physically and psychologically, into a space defined not by stature or wealth but by observation, insight, and the courage to speak when others remained silent. Thomas's mind cycled through possibilities, weighing scenarios, aligning fragmented recollections with the details presented before him, the subtle shifts in weather and light emphasizing the gravity of the moment and the fragile balance between skepticism and recognition. Maya's posture remained impeccable, her breathing steady, her eyes unwavering, the soft mist brushing against her hood and cheek highlighting her presence without diminishing the weight of her claim. The tension stretched, unbroken, as Thomas processed the dimensions of this encounter, the confluence of physical evidence, personal recollection, and the intuitive certainty that Maya projected, all combining to challenge his preconceptions and demand engagement. Each movement, each microexpression, each slight shift of weight or glance from the girl held significance, as he realized that every instinct he had relied upon in his world of absolute control was being re-examined under the illumination of a single, attentive, and perceptive observer. The city beyond seemed to recede, sounds fading, light bending around the edges of the marble and foliage, leaving the two figures suspended in a moment of acute awareness and potential revelation. Thomas exhaled again, the sound barely audible over the distant hum and gentle drip of lingering rain, and he felt the subtle pressure of decision forming within him, a recognition that the next steps would need careful consideration, deliberate action, and a willingness to follow the lead of insight rather than authority alone. Maya's gaze did not falter, maintaining the quiet magnetism that drew focus and restrained judgment, a reminder that clarity often arrived from the most unexpected sources, and that truth demanded attention regardless of age or circumstance. The wind shifted, brushing across the garden, stirring loose petals and carrying the faint aroma of wet grass and stone, enhancing the sensory clarity of the moment, reinforcing the stillness and the careful observation that framed the encounter, each element layering into a tableau of anticipation and meticulous perception. Thomas's eyes lingered on the evidence she provided, the handkerchief, the subtle physical markers, the consistency of her observations, the depth of her recall, and in that prolonged moment of consideration, a slow acceptance began to form, tempered by caution but impossible to dismiss entirely, leaving the air dense with expectation, the scene poised on the cusp of discovery, and the audience drawn to the unfolding revelation awaiting. The next step. The mist in the memorial garden began to lift slightly, revealing the contours of bronze plaques and damp stone benches, their surfaces reflecting the pale, shifting light as the clouds overhead thinned ever so subtly. Thomas Beckett's gaze remained fixed on Maya Johnson, the young black girl whose presence seemed to command attention far beyond her years, her small hands still gripping the frayed handkerchief, fingers curling around the edges with precision and care. He stepped closer, boots crunching softly on the wet gravel, each movement measured and deliberate, as if approaching an understanding that had long eluded him. The assistants lingered at a cautious distance, exchanging uneasy glances, aware that the moment held significance far greater than the simple act of listening. It was an awakening of insight, a realignment of perception in the presence of someone whose clarity could not be ignored. Maya's dark eyes held his steadily, and in them was a quiet authority, a confidence grounded not in volume or force, but in observation and understanding. The air was dense with the faint scent of wet grass and stone, the gentle patter of residual rain providing a rhythm that punctuated the charged silence between them. Thomas bent slightly, studying the handkerchief again, noting the intricate stitching, the subtle wear, the faintly lingering scent, all elements that corroborated the narrative she presented, a story pieced together from careful observation, memory, and a courage that belied her age. Each breath he took was measured, deliberate, a silent acknowledgment that every instinct he had relied upon in his life of control and precision was now being re-examined under the illumination of this child's insight. The mist shifted with the wind, brushing over the marble surfaces and wet leaves, carrying the soft sound of droplets tapping against the stone, each sound amplifying the sense of suspense, heightening awareness, and concentrating attention on the interaction unfolding in this small space. Maya shifted slightly, the handkerchief moving just enough to catch the diffused light, a subtle glimmer that reinforced the reality of her observations and the meticulous accuracy with which she had gathered her evidence. Thomas's mind raced, connecting fragments of recollection, reinterpreting overlooked signs, and reconciling them with the detailed account before him, the implications settling gradually, yet inexorably, like the quiet spreading of water over smooth stone. Around them, the world seemed to fade into a muted backdrop, the city beyond the garden reduced to faint hums and distant sounds, leaving the interaction between adult and child as the focal point, charged with the gravity of discovery and the tension of anticipation. Thomas's hands moved subtly, adjusting stance and focus, absorbing each visual cue, each minute gesture, the weight of rain on clothing, the texture of gravel beneath boots, the persistent yet gentle rhythm of dripping water, all coalescing to reinforce the immediacy and weight of the moment. Maya remained steadfast, her posture impeccably poised, eyes unwavering, presence quiet yet commanding, each element of her being asserting the validity of her claim, compelling Thomas to consider, to question, to realign his understanding. The assistants shuffled slightly, careful not to intrude, yet keenly aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment, the balance of authority subtly shifting in favor of observation, insight, and truth rather than stature or wealth. Thomas exhaled slowly, the air cool and damp around him, the tension coiling and uncoiling within, awareness sharpening as he considered the next steps, the responsibility now resting upon him to act on the clarity presented, the weight of potential consequences pressing lightly, yet insistently. The subtle light filtering through clouds highlighted the textures of the garden, the wet bronze, and the stone surfaces, enhancing every detail, every nuance, every marker of authenticity and careful observation in Maya's hands, reinforcing the undeniable precision of her insights and the quiet power of her presence. He shifted slightly closer, eyes locked on the evidence she presented, the embroidered handkerchief, the scar, the faint gleam of a necklace, all confirming a reality he had been forced to reconsider, every small element anchoring the truth and bridging the gap between disbelief and acknowledgment. The space between them contracted almost imperceptibly, focused on the unspoken tension, the silent exchange of recognition, and the careful, deliberate assessment that Thomas engaged in, weighing the validity of each detail, each observation, each subtle cue, with the gravity that the moment demanded, leaving the audience poised for the continuation, the unfolding revelation, and the next step that would inevitably shift everything. The mist had almost lifted entirely, leaving the memorial garden slick and glistening under a soft, diffused light that made every stone surface and bronze plaque shimmer faintly. Thomas Becket stood still, a careful balance between disbelief and curiosity etched across his face, the frayed handkerchief still in Maya Johnson's small hands, drawing his full attention as though it contained the weight of the world itself. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to disturb the subtle equilibrium that seemed to have formed between them, each footfall on the wet gravel deliberate, echoing softly across the space, harmonizing with the faint drip of lingering raindrops from the surrounding trees. Maya shifted slightly, not in hesitation but to reveal the handkerchief more clearly, the golden embroidery catching the light in a delicate shimmer, each stitch a testament to careful observation and meticulous attention to detail. Her eyes held his with unyielding focus, small yet commanding, conveying certainty and awareness that demanded acknowledgment, and Thomas felt the invisible pull of her conviction, drawing him further into the realization of what she had uncovered. The assistants around them remained quiet, their movements minimal, the air dense with anticipation, every slight sound amplified in the charged silence, as if even the smallest rustle of clothing or tap of a foot could disrupt the fragile tension. Thomas bent slightly, examining the fabric closely, the texture, the wear, the faint scent that hinted at recent contact with environments and objects only Maya could have known about, each element confirming the veracity of her account, each detail a subtle, undeniable proof that resonated in the careful architecture of her observation. A breeze stirred, brushing across the garden, shifting droplets along leaves and stone surfaces, carrying the soft, earthy scent of wet grass and rain-soaked marble, enhancing the sensory awareness of the scene, every nuance underscoring the moment's gravity. Thomas inhaled deeply, the air cold and damp against his lungs, his thoughts racing through fragmented memories, overlooked signs, and assumptions long held, and in that process he began to feel the slow, steady accumulation of understanding pressing upon him, the realization that the child standing before him possessed insight that challenged months of carefully structured belief. Maya's posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, fingers steady around the handkerchief, every microgesture purposeful and deliberate, demonstrating confidence without a hint of arrogance, commanding focus by sheer clarity and composure. The soundscape, muted yet rich with subtle details, made every breath, every movement, every minor adjustment of stance feel significant, the quiet dripping of water from leaves and plaques punctuating the tension, as if the environment itself was attentive to the unfolding moment. Thomas's eyes swept over the evidence she presented, the handkerchief, the scar, the necklace, the precise recollection of minute details, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon him, a gravity that demanded not only attention but action, the implications of an action crystallizing with each careful observation. Maya's gaze did not waver, her presence anchored in calm, the authority she projected silent but palpable, compelling Thomas to reconcile what he had long dismissed with the reality manifesting before him. The subtle illumination of the clearing mist highlighted every facet of the scene, droplets glinting like tiny prisms across marble and metal, the soft reflection emphasizing the delicate, yet resolute, nature of the child's evidence. Thomas adjusted his stance, absorbing the depth of the information before him, aligning fragmented recollections, connecting dots previously invisible, and allowing the gravity of the moment to permeate his awareness. The shift from skepticism to recognition slow, deliberate, and inevitable. Each step he considered, each movement measured, drew him incrementally into a space governed not by hierarchy or wealth, but by observation, insight, and truth, the tension in the garden thick with potential and poised on the edge of revelation. Maya's calm composure, precise articulation, and unwavering attention to the details of her discovery forced Thomas to consider the next steps carefully, the necessity of action now unavoidable, and the quiet strength of the young girl shaping a path forward that demanded engagement, verification, and deliberate pursuit, leaving the scene charged with anticipation, insight, and a profound sense of emerging understanding. The unfolding story balanced delicately on her courage and clarity, compelling the audience to remain suspended in the moment, eager for what would come next. Thomas Becket took another careful step forward, his polished shoes pressing lightly into the damp gravel of the memorial garden, the soft crunch beneath him sounding unusually loud in the thick, expectant silence. The mist had mostly cleared now, revealing the smooth contours of the bronze plaques and the glistening marble steps, each surface catching the faint light that filtered through the lingering clouds. Maya Johnson remained steadfast, her small frame poised and unwavering, the frayed handkerchief clutched firmly in her hands, the golden embroidery glinting subtly as she adjusted her grip to emphasize the evidence she had meticulously observed and recalled. Thomas's eyes followed every movement, registering the faint scar on the wrist, the short platinum hair, the delicate necklace, and the exact alignment of each piece of proof, his mind racing to reconcile this tangible confirmation with the fragments of memory he had been revisiting for months. Around them, the soft whisper of wind brushed across the wet leaves, carrying the scent of rain-soaked grass and stone, the ambient sounds lending a rhythm to the suspense, punctuating the unspoken understanding between adult and child. He bent slightly to examine the handkerchief more closely, the texture, the wear, and the subtle dampness of recent exposure enhancing the sense of reality and immediacy, and he felt the weight of months of assumptions, misplaced certainty, and overlooked signs pressing against him, demanding attention, verification, and thoughtful action. Maya's gaze did not waver, her dark eyes locking on his with an intensity that carried authority without aggression, her posture both calm and commanding, embodying the quiet certainty that he had yet to fully acknowledge. Each breath he took was deliberate, measured, his chest rising and falling against the cool, damp air, the tension stretching like a taut wire between them, every heartbeat amplifying the sense of anticipation and focus that dominated the space. Thomas's thoughts raced, drawing connections, weighing possibilities, and replaying sequences of events that had once seemed insignificant, all now illuminated by the meticulous details that Maya had provided with precision beyond her years. The assistants lingered at a respectful distance, sensing the gravity of the moment, their own movements minimized, the rustling of papers and the faint shuffle of feet amplifying the silent rhythm of the unfolding revelation. The garden itself seemed to pause with them, droplets clinging to leaves and branches, the soft reflection of muted light on wet marble and bronze surfaces highlighting every subtle movement, every minor adjustment, every micro-expression in a scene that held more significance than appearances could convey. Thomas adjusted his stance, carefully redistributing his weight, absorbing the totality of Maya's presentation, the combined force of observation, courage, and clarity compelling him to confront the implications of her insights fully, and to recognize the power of truth presented without embellishment or demand. Maya shifted slightly, revealing a new angle of the handkerchief, the golden thread catching the light just so, reinforcing the authenticity of her claim, the evidence undeniable, yet delivered with an understated precision that left Thomas aware of both the gravity and subtlety of the revelation. The gentle patter of residual rain, the soft exhale of wind, and the ambient hum of the city beyond created a quiet backdrop, framing the interaction as both intimate and expansive, concentrating attention on the unfolding dynamic, every element emphasizing the careful observation, deliberate movement, and unspoken understanding between the two figures. Thomas's breath drew deeper, his body language slowly relaxing as he absorbed the import of the evidence, each detail aligning with his memory, each subtle indicator confirming what Maya had meticulously documented, and the tension began to shift from disbelief to active consideration, the garden holding them in a moment suspended between acknowledgment and action, insight and anticipation, leaving the narrative poised on the brink of the next critical step and the audience compelled to follow the story to its inevitable unfolding. The morning light had begun to filter through the thinning clouds, casting a soft, silver glow over the memorial garden, the wet stone and bronze plaques glistening faintly as the drizzle completely ceased. Thomas Becket stood still, absorbing the scene, his mind tracing the contours of the evidence Maya Johnson had meticulously laid before him, the delicate handkerchief in her small hands, embroidered with subtle golden thread, now fully visible and unmistakable in its significance. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp grass and marble, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze punctuating the otherwise profound silence that stretched between them, every sound amplified by the intensity of the moment. Maya's dark eyes met his unwaveringly, her presence commanding attention without a word. Her small stature belied the quiet authority she projected, a calm assurance that contrasted sharply with the storm of realization swirling inside Thomas. He took a careful step closer, boots crunching lightly on the gravel, his gaze never leaving the details she had highlighted, each observation aligning with his memories and records, confirming a truth that had long been obscured. The assistants lingered at the periphery, conscious of the delicate tension, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding and aware that any movement might disturb the fragile equilibrium, their breath shallow, the soft rustle of papers under their fingers the only sound marking the passage of time. Thomas bent slightly, studying the handkerchief, noting the precision of the stitching, the subtle wear of the fabric, and the faint scent that carried traces of distant places and moments, each element reinforcing the veracity of Maya's careful observations and the attention to detail that had guided her actions. The gentle wind carried the smell of rain-soaked foliage across the garden, brushing against Thomas's coat and Maya's hood, as if the environment itself were emphasizing the significance of the exchange, every nuance in the sound and motion highlighting the deliberate nature of her presence and the accuracy of her account. Thomas's thoughts raced, connecting overlooked signs, fragmented recollections, and subtle markers he had previously dismissed, each new realization pressing against the certainty he had long relied upon, the weight of insight building steadily with each heartbeat. Maya shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on the handkerchief to display its contents more clearly, the golden embroidery catching the diffused light in delicate flashes, reinforcing her authority and the undeniable credibility of the evidence she had presented. Thomas's mind absorbed the totality of the details, the scar, the necklace, the precise recollection of gestures and movements, and he felt the slow, deliberate acknowledgment of truth pressing against his previous assumptions, compelling him to confront a reality he had long avoided. The garden seemed to hold its breath with them, the dripping water from leaves and the distant hum of the city beyond forming a muted rhythm that emphasized the significance of each moment, every small shift in posture, glance, or movement magnified in importance. Maya's posture remained impeccable, chin lifted, shoulders squared, her breathing steady, eyes fixed with an intensity that commanded focus, her small frame projecting a calm certainty that carried far beyond her size. Thomas adjusted slightly, his stance deliberate, absorbing the implications, weighing the responsibilities now pressing upon him, each element of observation and evidence carefully considered in the quiet rhythm of thought and reflection. The sunlight shifted faintly, illuminating the edges of the plaques and the wet gravel beneath their feet, highlighting each detail, each texture, reinforcing the tangible reality of what Maya had presented and the subtle power of her presence. The assistants, standing at a cautious distance, remained motionless, their awareness heightened, understanding that this encounter was defining a turning point, that observation and insight were commanding attention in ways that authority and stature alone could not. Thomas exhaled slowly, each breath measured and deliberate, absorbing the gravity of the situation, the careful evidence, and the quiet strength of the girl who had led him to a new understanding, the atmosphere dense with anticipation and the potential for action, the moment suspended on the edge of recognition and resolution, poised for the next step in the unfolding narrative. Thomas Beckett's eyes lingered on the handkerchief for a long moment, the subtle golden threads catching the diffused morning light in a way that seemed almost intentional, each glimmer reinforcing the credibility of the story Maya Johnson had been unfolding. He stepped closer, careful with every movement on the damp gravel, as the garden around them remained hushed, the occasional drip of water from leaves the only sound marking the passage of time. Maya's gaze held him firmly, steady and unwavering, the certainty in her dark eyes compelling him to reconcile months of uncertainty with the tangible evidence she presented. The assistants remained at a cautious distance, barely breathing, aware that the balance of the moment was delicate and could shift with the slightest interruption. Thomas bent slightly, studying the handkerchief and the precise way she held it, noting the subtle wear of the fabric, the faint scent that hinted at recent exposure to the environments she described, and the careful alignment of the embroidery that matched his memories of a necklace once seen long ago. His mind raced, reconstructing fragmented events, overlooked details, and the gaps he had filled with assumptions, now confronted by the meticulous observations of a 10-year-old whose attention to detail surpassed expectations. The mist and remaining puddles on the marble steps reflected a pale silver light, highlighting each movement, each gesture, each subtle shift in posture between the two of them, and Thomas felt the mounting weight of awareness pressing against his perception. Maya's small hands adjusted slightly, the handkerchief shifting to catch more light, the movement subtle but deliberate, reinforcing the reality of her account, the precision with which she had documented the evidence, and the quiet authority in which she presented it. The wind carried the scent of wet stone and grass across the garden, stirring leaves softly and emphasizing the quiet tension, each sensory element aligning with the moment of discovery and the anticipation of action. Thomas's breathing was measured, deliberate, each inhale and exhale a marker of the careful consideration he was giving to the young girl's observations, the weight of the months of unanswered questions pressing on him as he connected each piece of evidence to the broader narrative he had been piecing together alone. The garden seemed to contract around them, the focus narrowing to the exchange between child and adult, observation and recognition, as every small detail, droplets glistening on marble, faint reflections on bronze, the subtle textures of fabric, amplified the intensity of the moment and reinforced the plausibility of Maya's claims. Thomas adjusted his stance again, taking in the totality of the evidence, the deliberate calm in Maya's posture, the clarity of her observations, and the undeniable alignment with his own memories, which forced him to consider the next steps and acknowledge the legitimacy of what she had revealed. The assistants, still observing quietly, sensed the shift in authority, recognizing that insight and evidence were holding sway over assumption and status, each micro-expression, breath, and subtle gesture magnified in significance by the quiet tension. Maya remained poised, her chin lifted, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Thomas with an intensity that projected command without aggression, the strength of conviction radiating outward and shaping the atmosphere around them, compelling focus and respect. Thomas exhaled slowly, letting the information sink in, aligning observations with memories, measuring the implications, and feeling the slow transformation of doubt into acknowledgment, the garden holding them in a suspended moment of anticipation as the first careful steps toward verification and action took shape. The soft light filtered through the thinning clouds, reflecting off wet stone and bronze surfaces, enhancing every subtle movement, every nuanced expression, every deliberate microgesture that communicated clarity, authority, and truth. The tension stretched long and taut, concentrated on the precise details of the evidence, the unwavering composure of Maya, and the emerging recognition in Thomas, all combining to create a space charged with anticipation and expectation, leaving the narrative suspended on the cusp of resolution, poised for the next moment of revelation that would define the unfolding events and compel action. The first hint of sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering pale beams across the memorial garden, the wet marble steps and bronze plaques reflecting the gentle light like subtle signals in a carefully choreographed tableau. Thomas Becket stood close now, the weight of months of doubt pressing on him, his blue eyes tracing every detail that Maya Johnson presented with unwavering precision, the handkerchief in her small hands illuminated softly by the shifting morning glow. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of rain-soaked grass, mingling with the metallic tang of the bronze plaques, each inhalation sharpening Thomas's focus as he pieced together the narrative laid out in meticulous detail before him. Maya held the handkerchief slightly higher, revealing the golden embroidery, catching the light just enough to make the small letters visible, each thread a testament to careful observation and the depth of her attention, and Thomas felt a subtle, undeniable confirmation settling into his consciousness. The garden remained hushed, the soft stir of leaves in the breeze and the occasional drip of water from foliage punctuating the profound silence, every sound magnified against the backdrop of tension that had grown steadily over the past hour. Thomas bent slightly, absorbing the physical and symbolic weight of the evidence in front of him, the subtle fabric texture, the delicate scent, the precise alignment with the scar, hair, and necklace details, all of it coalescing into a clear picture he could no longer dismiss. The assistants hovered at the edges of the garden, their movements minimal, aware that they were witnessing a moment that shifted authority from assumption and status to observation and insight, their eyes reflecting the same careful focus and quiet tension that had settled over Thomas. Maya's posture remained impeccable, her chin slightly lifted, shoulders squared, eyes fixed with unyielding intensity, small yet commanding, every gesture precise, every breath measured, her presence radiating clarity and confidence that drew attention effortlessly. The soft silver light continued to shift, highlighting every small detail, the moisture glistening on marble and bronze, droplets running down leaves and pooling in shallow depressions, all of it accentuating the immediacy and tangible reality of the evidence she presented. Thomas exhaled slowly, each breath deliberate, the weight of understanding pressing gently yet firmly against the walls of certainty he had maintained, his mind tracing connections and reconstructing events that had long seemed lost or irrelevant, now illuminated by Maya's meticulous observations. He noticed the subtle micro-expressions in her posture, the deliberate shifts in her hands and grip, the careful orientation of the handkerchief to catch the light, and every minute detail reinforced the authority of her account, compelling him to confront what he had overlooked and reconsider his assumptions with care. The gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth and wet foliage across the space, and Thomas felt the alignment of evidence, observation, and insight settling into a coherent pattern that could no longer be ignored. The tension in the garden was thick but controlled, every element, the soundscape, the shifting light, the moisture in the air, the placement of every object, heightening the awareness of the critical moment, magnifying the significance of each microgesture, each deliberate movement. Maya remained steady, her eyes unwavering, the handkerchief in her hands a tangible symbol of precision, courage, and undeniable truth, forcing Thomas to engage fully with the reality she presented, to process its implications, and to acknowledge the meticulous work that had brought clarity to the uncertainty of months past. The assistants, still observing quietly, were conscious of the pivot in authority, the subtle yet profound shift that had occurred, as insight, evidence, and clarity now guided the recognition, leaving Thomas poised between disbelief and active acknowledgment, suspended in a moment where every heartbeat carried weight, every breath counted, and the next step demanded careful and deliberate action in the unfolding revelation that was about to redefine the situation completely. Thomas Becket exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible over the subtle rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the city beyond the garden, his mind caught in a whirlwind of reflection and reconsideration. Every detail that Maya Johnson had presented, the handkerchief, the golden embroidery, the faint scar on the wrist, the platinum hair, and the necklace, pressed against his memory, forcing him to confront every assumption he had made, every moment he had dismissed as inconsequential, and every conclusion he had taken for granted. He felt a quiet but insistent stirring of humility, an acknowledgment that despite his years of experience, wealth, and influence, he had overlooked the clarity presented by a 10-year-old whose attention to detail and calm courage far exceeded expectations. He took a tentative step closer, the gravel crunching softly under his polished shoes, and the subtle movement seemed to draw a quiet stillness over the assistants who had lingered at a distance, their eyes wide, their breath shallow, aware that the gravity of the moment demanded silence and focus. Maya's posture remained impeccable, her chin lifted, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering, and the handkerchief in her small hands glinted in the soft light, a tangible testament to the meticulous observation and reasoning she had employed. Thomas's gaze swept across the evidence again, tracing each subtle line, each nuance, and in the act of careful examination, he felt the slow but undeniable formation of understanding, a realignment of perception in which observation and insight held precedence over assumption and authority. The garden seemed to contract around them, the soft light reflecting off wet marble and bronze surfaces, droplets falling intermittently from leaves, and adding a gentle percussion to the tense rhythm of thought and anticipation, each sound underscoring the delicate transition of comprehension taking place. His mind turned inward, replaying moments of oversight, gaps in attention, and unexamined possibilities, and he realized that the child before him had navigated a landscape of observation and logic that he himself had underestimated, and that the depth of her insight demanded both acknowledgment and deliberate action. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the fresh scent of wet foliage and stone, brushing gently against their clothing and skin, accentuating the immediacy and reality of the scene, the rhythm of nature providing a quiet accompaniment to the unfolding revelation. Thomas exhaled once more, slow and deliberate, his posture subtly adjusting as he integrated the information, the weight of recognition settling in, the acknowledgment of truth taking shape not with haste, but with measured consideration and quiet respect. Maya's calm presence and steadfast gaze served as a lodestar in the moment, guiding his thoughts, drawing attention to the precision of each observation, the methodical alignment of facts, and the courage to present them without expectation of immediate belief or reward. The assistants, standing at a distance, remained motionless, understanding instinctively that the pivot of authority was occurring, that clarity and insight were directing the course of the encounter, and that their role was to observe and support rather than intervene. Thomas's eyes lingered on the handkerchief, the fine details, the subtle evidence, and the depth of perception that had enabled the child to assemble such a coherent and compelling account, and a slow, almost imperceptible shift began in his expression, from doubt to contemplation, from surprise to recognition, as the implications of the information settled fully into his awareness. Every breath, every micro-movement, every subtle adjustment of stance or posture carried significance, the environment itself, wet stone, glistening bronze, drifting mist, and the soft illumination of early morning, reinforcing the gravity of the moment and the unspoken communication between child and adult, observation and acknowledgment, insight and authority. Thomas exhaled finally, the weight of realization pressing gently yet insistently, and in the silence that followed, he felt a quiet internal shift, the first stirrings of recognition and understanding, the acknowledgement that the meticulous, courageous observations of Maya Johnson were not only accurate, but transformative, compelling him to act, to investigate, and to honor the clarity she had brought forth in a moment suspended between disbelief and revelation, leaving the scene poised on the cusp of decisive action and the audience captivated by the unfolding story. Thomas Becket took a slow, deliberate breath, the cool morning air brushing across his face, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and damp foliage, each inhalation grounding him in the reality that had unfolded before his eyes. Maya Johnson, standing small but resolute, held the handkerchief steadily, the subtle golden embroidery glinting in the soft light. Each thread a testament to the meticulous observation and quiet courage that had brought clarity to a situation long clouded by doubt and uncertainty. He stepped forward, gravel shifting under his polished shoes, each movement measured, careful, as if approaching a fragile equilibrium that had been built through careful attention, observation, and the undeniable truth presented by the young girl. The assistants lingered at a distance, their presence subdued, aware that this was a moment where authority and experience were being rebalanced by insight, precision, and observation, the quiet tension heightening their awareness with each passing second. Thomas bent slightly, studying the handkerchief, noting every fine detail, the texture, the wear, the precise alignment with previous memories and records, the faint traces of scent that spoke to recent environments and experiences, each element reinforcing the credibility and depth of Maya's account. His mind raced, tracing connections, reconstructing overlooked moments, re-examining assumptions, and integrating the meticulous observations she had presented, every small piece of evidence converging to form a coherent narrative that demanded acknowledgment. Maya's gaze remained unshaken, steady and precise, her posture conveying confidence without force, authority without aggression, and a clarity of purpose that compelled attention and reflection from even the most experienced adult. The soft light filtering through the thinning clouds cast subtle highlights on the wet marble steps and bronze plaques, glistening droplets emphasizing the stillness, the gravity, and the careful focus of the interaction, each element reinforcing the significance of the moment and the necessity of careful consideration and deliberate action. Thomas exhaled once more, slow and measured, allowing the weight of recognition to settle fully, absorbing the totality of the evidence, the precision of her observations, and the courage with which they had been presented, the combination, forming an undeniable directive to act, to verify, and to pursue the truth she had uncovered. The garden seemed to contract around them, the sounds of distant traffic and soft rustling of leaves providing a muted soundtrack, accentuating the isolation and intensity of the moment, the focus drawn entirely to the interaction between the child and the billionaire. Every subtle movement, Maya's slight shift, the glint of thread in the handkerchief, the faint moisture on the marble, added to the gravity of the scene, each detail reinforcing the careful balance between observation, insight, and acknowledgment. Thomas's eyes scanned the evidence repeatedly, the scar, the necklace, the platinum hair, the handkerchief, and the synthesis of these details pressed against every preconceived notion, challenging assumptions, and demanding recognition of the depth of Maya's attention and intellect. He adjusted his stance, absorbing the weight of implication, the necessity of deliberate, precise action, the recognition that months of uncertainty could now be transformed by the clarity she had provided, the insight she had insisted upon presenting calmly, deliberately, and with unwavering accuracy. The assistants remained quietly observant, sensing the subtle shift in authority, the unspoken acknowledgment that insight and careful observation now held precedence over status and past assumptions, each of them attuned to the nuanced changes in posture, gaze, and expression between the two figures. The subtle illumination continued to play across the wet surfaces, droplets glimmering, textures highlighted, every visual cue reinforcing the significance and reality of the evidence, the precision of its presentation, and the quiet but undeniable influence Maya held in guiding recognition and action. Thomas exhaled again, the sound faint, deliberate, absorbing the weight of months of oversight, integrating the detailed observations, and preparing himself to move forward, to act on the clarity and courage presented, the moment poised at the threshold of verification, engagement, and the unfolding of consequences that would reshape understanding and compel the next careful, deliberate steps. The morning light had softened further, casting a warm, gentle glow across the memorial garden, illuminating the glistening marble steps and bronze plaques with a quiet brilliance. Thomas Becket stood in thoughtful stillness, absorbing the weight of the revelations that Maya Johnson had presented, the handkerchief in her small hands now resting lightly against her chest, the subtle golden embroidery catching the shifting light as if affirming the truth she had so carefully laid before him. The garden was hushed. The occasional drip of residual moisture from leaves the only sound marking the passage of time, emphasizing the delicate balance of the moment and the significance of each nuanced gesture. Thomas's gaze softened, the blue of his eyes reflecting a slow but profound recognition, a realization that months of uncertainty, assumptions, and missed signals were now coalescing into clarity because of the unwavering attention, precision, and courage of a 10-year-old girl. He stepped forward slightly, the gravel shifting beneath his polished shoes, and every movement felt measured, deliberate, as if acknowledging that the path forward required careful thought, deep observation, and deliberate action. Maya's posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes fixed unwaveringly on him, projecting quiet authority, a calm assurance that contrasted the storm of internal reflection that Thomas experienced, the weight of responsibility and clarity pressing gently, yet insistently against his consciousness. The subtle scent of wet stone and grass hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of bronze from the plaques, carrying with it the gravity and serenity of the garden, heightening the focus on every minor detail, every small movement, every careful breath. Thomas bent slightly, studying the handkerchief and every fine aspect of Maya's presentation, the precise stitching, the subtle wear, the faint hints of environments she had encountered, all aligned perfectly with his memory, records, and intuition, creating a compelling convergence of evidence, observation, and insight that could not be ignored. The assistants remained at a respectful distance, their breath shallow, aware that the dynamic of authority had shifted subtly but decisively, that observation, insight, and precision now held sway, guiding recognition, understanding, and the direction of action. The light shifted, glancing off wet marble, glimmering bronze, and the delicate threads of the handkerchief, emphasizing each movement, micro-expression, and subtle posture that communicated volumes without words, reinforcing the undeniable validity of Maya's observations and the calm confidence with which she presented them. Thomas exhaled slowly, measured, the tension and gravity of the moment coiling and uncoiling within him as he processed the magnitude of what had been revealed, tracing connections, integrating overlooked details, and acknowledging the depth and accuracy of her insight. Every element of the scene, the soft illumination, the moisture-laden air, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the city beyond, worked together to amplify the clarity, focus, and intensity of the interaction, highlighting the delicate but undeniable authority of observation over assumption and experience. Maya adjusted the handkerchief slightly, ensuring the embroidery caught the light, a subtle, deliberate gesture that reinforced her meticulous attention to detail and her unwavering confidence. Thomas's eyes followed each motion, noting every nuance, absorbing every piece of information, every minute observation, and allowing it to reshape his understanding. The weight of months of uncertainty giving way to deliberate acknowledgment and careful contemplation. The garden felt suspended in time, the mist and light weaving together to create a stage for this pivotal moment of clarity, recognition, and potential action, each heartbeat stretching and holding, each breath deliberate and measured, as Thomas processed the implications of the evidence, the courage, and the insight that Maya had brought to bear. Slowly, a sense of resolution began to take hold, tempered with anticipation, awareness, and the recognition that the next steps would require deliberate care, thoughtful action, and unwavering attention to the clarity provided, leaving the scene poised at the threshold of consequence, understanding, and the unfolding of a revelation that would ripple far beyond the quiet confines of the memorial garden. The subtle glow of morning light casting a serene, contemplative atmosphere over both observer and witness as the narrative reached its pivotal, transformative moment.